Today on the Chess Equity Project interview series, we've got Julia Francesca Engel. She's a quantitative economist at Kiel University in Germany. She was born in Tennessee in the US, but completed university and grad school in Germany. She was a visiting researcher at the University of Paris, where she worked with professor and FIDE master Jose de Souza. Julia is an avid chess player, but today we'll be talking about her research, her paper, How Men and Women Respond to Failure, Evidence from Chess Tournaments, won the Best Paper Award at the 2025 Young Economists Forum in Brno, Czech Republic, and also won a Chessable Research Award. Welcome, Julia. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction. You're being far too kind to me.
Well, how long until you're a doctor, Julia? Can we call you that yet?
No, you cannot. Legally, you cannot.
It's
Well,
pretty
you
close,
can.
though.
You can. I can't. No, I'm trying. You know how you can jinx it. To submit within the end of May. That's the goal.
Okay.
And then it's going to be everyone needs to read it, and nobody wants to go through 200 pages of tables and double check everything. So that takes some time, and then they're going to make me defend it.
Sure.
Unfortunately, not with a chess match. And
that would be a high pressure match.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow, that's funny. So you were born in the US and now here you are an economist in Germany. What was that journey like?
I mean, slight correction, just in the interest of transparency. I have German parents. I was just raised in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
So I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee, initially. And Dad moved there for work. I was 2 by the time we moved. So all of my memories as from a child are from the States. And then at some point we moved back and, I turned 18. It was time for college. And well, we have college at home and it's a bit cheaper. It's a bit closer to us. So it was more of a longer stay in the United States rather than that I was born there, unfortunately. So I only have a German passport.
Okay. Well, that's great. What's your chess background?
So I played as a kid.
Okay. You still play though. You play now.
Oh God, I'm one of the many people that dropped off out of chess. So I started playing in Tennessee at my local YMCA. And from there on out, I'm pretty sure I did some regional tournaments. At that point, I just wanted to play. I didn't really care about anything like that.
Sure.
And then when we moved back to Germany, I still continued playing, and then school started really picking up. And I also started losing more. So I was like, yeah, this is not for me. I didn't have the work ethic yet, and I really wish I had kept at it. And then through the dissertation, because it was dealing so much with chess, and obviously, it's a very nice bonding thing, right? You can just share a game.
Yeah.
So talk to people. It's this very low stakes way of getting to know people. And then throughout the course of the PhD, I started playing again more and more regularly. And nowadays, I think I'm some 15 something rated in England, but I haven't played enough games. I think that the rating is stabilized. So I'm pretty sure I'm overrated. So I think I'm 1,500 on chess.com. I don't think it translates one to one.
You might be the first overrated player who admitted to being overrated that I've heard.
No, but it's just because everyone's going to come and be like, but you're going to beat me. I'm like, my brother in Christ, the only thing I'm good at is using a chess engine. That's the only thing I'm good at.
Wow. Okay. Well, so speaking of the engines, let's talk about your research entitled Tuesdays. So you analyzed all the games from all Title Tuesdays for 2 years, almost 300,000 games. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think it's 280 something, but yeah, rounded up 300,000 because we had to do more for a second project.
Oh, wow. Okay. So tell me again, how did you come up with the idea for this?
All right. So in general, what we kind of know about gender gaps in competitive environments, we know that women opt out of competing at far higher rates than men. Why do we care about competition? Let's think about applying for jobs, right? It's essentially you against a bunch of other applicants. And one of you is going to get the job, or a promotion. The rest of you are not going to have anything. That doesn't mean that you're bad at your job. It doesn't mean that you're unqualified. It just means that it doesn't work out for you this time. However, if we're thinking about like a longer term perspective, we're going to want to make sure that you keep applying, that you keep trying, because otherwise we'd be losing someone very, very qualified from a role that they're well suited for.
Mm.
Now, if we're thinking about, for example, gender gaps in management, so, right, if you're thinking about like your typical board statistics that only the absolute minority of board members are women, so those are like super competitive management fields, and it keeps thinning out as we move to the top. So I was curious on whether failure had something to do with that. Like, do women, once they fail, for example, opt out at higher rates and just say, oh, it's clearly not meant for me? Because that's what some of the lab literature has indicated might be an issue, at least amongst the general population. Obviously, if you've already entered that environment, you're already selecting on a couple of things. But I was just interested in whether this is a mechanism. And second of all, if failing somehow has a demotivational effect on how much effort you're willing to provide, how does this affect your decision making? And then again, are there gender gaps between men and women?
It's an interesting analogy to compare corporate leadership to the Title Tuesday sample. I mean, those are already sort of high level, top, 1%-ish,
Yeah.
people in each separate group. Okay. Tell me about the data. How did you come up with all of this Title Tuesday data?
So basically, I decided, okay, I want to study failure and I want to see, are there differences? Now, the question was, how do I do this? So purely from a how do I get from point A to point B perspective. So then you kind of, as economists, you start running through the options. Is there a data set where I have records? For example, if we think about like a big company who have like a large internal hiring board or something like that, right? Where you can track people who put in for internal promotions or something like that.
Mm.
Do those things exist? Probably. Am I going to get data from them as a PhD student in her second year? Probably not. So then I kept going through like, okay, what if I run a lab experiment? So if you think about like your standard psychology experiments that you've seen, for example, in TV shows or something like that, very similar thing, slightly different rules, but close enough. Costs money. Money is difficult to get if you're in research, right? You have to apply for funding and then you need to convince a bunch of people to give you money. And then ideally it better work out, or you need to apply for more funding. And then I was thinking about, okay, what if I run it on a chess platform? Right? What if I use this? Like there's clearly some gender gaps. And then I kept going and going and going. And then at some point I realized that I don't have to run my own experiment. The way that Title Tuesday is organized gave me all of the things that I needed to make this work. And I discussed it with a couple of colleagues and they were like, yeah, I could see that working. Are you sure that you want to do that kind of data work? Like, seems very high risk for a PhD project, for your first big solo endeavor. I was like, yeah, no, I want to do this. And then
Okay.
started doing the preliminary work and very much learning as I was doing.
Okay. Wow. So yeah, that is a lot of data work. Is there a word in economics for this sort of study where you just find data kind of in the wild
Yeah.
and harvest it? What's it called?
So it's called quasi-experimental research, essentially, or causal inference with observational data. It's a stacked up way of saying that sometimes in real life, things are just going to happen to you practically randomly. And if we use the correct statistical procedures, we're going to be able to account for a lot of the factors that contribute to stuff. And then sometimes, for example, if you think about county lines, one county has a policy, the other wasn't. I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's right at the border of Alabama and Georgia.
Okay.
Sometimes Tennessee will do something and Alabama and Georgia won't, but there's probably not much difference between me and someone who lives just opposite of me on the state line. And for
Sure.
example, like that, you can start comparing people. Now, for Title Tuesday specifically, the nice thing is it's the same person playing over and over again, which means that I can see you, for example, after you lost, but I can also see you after you won and just like look at this difference, checking for your rating and all of these things. So I can just basically compare you in different emotional states, statistically speaking.
Right. So the whole thing is, how do we respond to failure? So let me ask you, I mean, in general, how do title players respond to failure?
Well, I mean, in the short term, depends on whether you're a man or a woman, statistically speaking.
Okay.
So
There is a difference.
There is a difference. There is a difference. We did find something. So basically, in terms of error rates, so just did you find the optimal move or not? How big was the mistake? Things like that. Men tend to, I think the chess term is tilt slightly more after they lose. So they start playing less accurately, for example.
Mm.
And for women, I'm not able to detect this effect. At the aggregate, if anything, the evidence suggests that they slightly improve their play. So they're playing more precisely in the next round. So that's kind of the punchline result. In terms of opening strategies, there's this paper that maps it to risk openings. Men tend to pick more aggressive openings after they just lost. And they also quit at higher rates. Like the number one predictor of whether you're going to quit the Title Tuesday tournament is whether you lost the previous round.
Wow. Okay. And just I'm done for the night.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm done for the night. I'm hitting X. I'm done.
Okay. Wow. Is whether you lost the previous round. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the short term. That's kind of
Yes.
the night on a single Tuesday. If I were titled, I would be more likely to, as a man, play worse in a game following a loss, and I'd be more likely to play a more aggressive opening. How did you quantify the openings and whether they were aggressive or not? Did you have some help with?
I did. I did. So there's this really great paper by Gaddis and Grenzmark. It was published in Labor Economics in 2010. So full credit to them for this. But they basically interviewed a panel of chess experts. I think it was 8 of them. It was a fairly balanced panel. And they just asked them to rate each one of the 499 established Encyclopedia of Chess openings on whether they were solid or aggressive. Or then there was this category for it's ambiguous. Obviously,
Wow.
A00 is kind of like the whatever category, so they couldn't really rate that one. And then they did this from the perspective of both white and black as players. And they were incredibly gracious and incredibly kind and just sent me their classifications if you think it's useful, go for it. And my sincerest gratitude goes out to them because that I didn't expect them to offer.
That's wonderful. That seems like quite a tedious project, just thinking all the openings and trying to classify them. That's very interesting. Oh, so yeah, on the short term, on a particular Tuesday, is there anything else that happens on that
Yes.
particular day? Okay.
All right. So the punchline result is essentially that your expectations matter. If you see that a loss is coming, right? So if you're already mentally steeling yourself that you're going to be disappointed, the effects are less bad. How do I do
Are
this?
less
Well,
bad.
yeah. So
Okay.
if you're paired, right, you see your opponent's rating. Now, see, if
Okay,
I play
sure.
with my colleagues like Jose de Sousa or David Smurden, he's an FM or a GM, they are going to crush me alive. I'm not going to be very mad about that. Kind of in hyperbole. So
Oh
that
no,
isn't
yeah.
going to affect me as heavily. But if, for example, I lose against somebody who was lower rated than me, the effects are up to 3 times as big, for example, for the aggressive openings. And I think it was 30% bigger for how much more you misplay. So clearly this emotional state matters. So it's not surprising. We're human beings. We have biases. And of course, once we get upset, we like to get hung up on that, even though we rationally know it doesn't make sense, right? What happened, happened.
No, that 100% makes sense. I played a tournament last weekend and lost to a 10-year-old. So I know from experience that
Yeah.
the feeling of, I mean, I should have expected, we all should, playing the kids nowadays, but I get a little upset and say, oh man, going into the next
Yeah.
game. Yeah, totally.
It totally shakes your confidence.
Even at the top levels. Okay, so they're humans too. They're still mortal.
They're very much humans. At least the research indicates that they are.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So what else? So on these effects, they continue into following weeks.
Yes and no. So this is perhaps the very cool thing, right? So what happens between a round, like you said, Title Tuesday is one evening, or I suppose for you, being the United States, it's an evening in Europe, but for you, it's a morning or an afternoon. So what happens then, at least in the short term, women are apparently slightly more stable. So what we coin affect-driven reactions, women don't seem to be exhibiting them. At least they are doing so at far lower rates than men. Over the longer run, this simplifies slightly. Generally, you're going to decide every week, do I decide to enter or not? Or how long am I going to wait until I'm willing to try again? Obviously, here you have a couple of different things like scheduling issues, like people compete at different rates. There's going to be people who enter every week, and then they have this pattern, and I can statistically control for that. And there's going to be people who are more sporadic. The thing is, if it's completely random, I shouldn't be able to find any kind of pattern. So if I'm able to find something, at least it points that there's some sort of system going on. The short term is nobody likes losing, neither men nor women. So people who place like at the bottom, they're going to wait 2-3 weeks until they're willing to recompete. Compared to people at the top who are going to be, yep, that went well for me. I'm entering next week. And men and women do this at the same rate.
Okay.
So what's cool about this? Yeah. And why we care so much about this. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's this gender gap in willingness to compete. Now, again, for chess players who already, got their titles, there's reason to believe that this might not be quite as heavily pronounced. If I had found something in this setting, the implications would be slightly different. But what we've also found from the laboratory experiments is that if you tell people, oh, you were actually doing very, very well, that affects their future choices. So they might have had lower confidence or thought they were less good than they were. If you correct that misperception, this closes the gap. And like similarly skilled women or highly abled women are going to re-enter into competition. That's what we know from the lab. It's harder to show in the field because how often do you get perfect feedback? Now,
well, yeah, no, keep going. Yeah.
That's what's so nice about chess, right? You know how strong your opponents are. You get that rating information. Oh, I took down a GM. That's going to be a very different story for you and how you assess your performance, right? If you lost against stronger players, that might have not been that bad. Or if you had a couple of good matches. But overall, you're getting this very, very accurate information on how you compare against your peers. And apparently, both men and women are taking away very, very similar information from this highly accurate feedback. At least I'm able to see a very clear pattern.
Okay. No, that makes sense. That's where I was thinking because in chess is a great, not just a great game, but it seems like it's a pretty nice just field to be researched because of the ratings. Yes. They make such an easy just metric of how you can compare to other people.
Yeah.
Let's go back and will you tell me again about the psychological component? You tell someone they're doing better, they actually get better. Is that right?
Not 100%. So in terms of the lab literature, this is now moving away from what I've done and more talking about what other people have done.
Okay.
So what these environments are, they're highly stylized and highly simplified just so we can clearly separate out mechanisms. So you're probably not going to have real world equivalents, but what we're trying to see is how do people think and how do they allocate effort and how do they make their choices? Now, in our case, like the fundamental paper is Nidan and Westerlund. Essentially, you've got a competition of adding up numbers. In of itself, given the stereotype that boys tend to be better at math, already male favoring. And the idea was that basically you could be paid by two schemes. Either you get a fixed rate for every set of numbers that you add up correctly, or you get, I think it was triple, but don't pin me on this. It was at least it was significantly more if you enter into a tournament against a pool of other people and you have the most correctly added numbers.
Okay.
So when you're making this choice, this is before you've added up the numbers.
You're projecting your future performance.
Do you think that you're going to be able to outcalculate a pool of other opponents? And there's some variations of this. Sometimes it's, oh, you've already done it. Do you think it was good enough? But the tale of the story is always going to be the same. This experiment has been replicated over the world. It's probably one of the most replicated experiments. And a pretty robust finding, at least amongst college student samples, is that women are always going to, even if they did very, very well on the task, they're going to opt out at higher rates from this competition than men. Instead, men tend to display slight overconfidence on average. Like sometimes they're actually good, but the average guy thinks he's better than he actually is at this task. So what do you have?
Okay.
You've got a competitor pool where there's less skilled people in it, and you've got highly able women opting out of it. What can you do against that? And that's where this idea of feedback intervention comes in, that you, for example, inform them, hey, based on your last performance, you would have done this well. Then you see, does that change things? And it does. If women are told you actually were better than you thought you were, then they start entering at higher rates. And that's the key issue. How do we preserve that interest?
Yeah, that sounds like chess. Is this, I mean, I've read a little about stereotype threat. This sounds similar. Yeah.
It's slightly related. So stereotype threat, okay, so this is psychology now. And as an economist, it is my noble duty to say that anything that psychology does, we do better.
Of course.
No, I'm kidding. Like psychology has done so much in terms of metrification, and so much of behavioral economics is because we've seen results from psychology come in and we're thinking about how does this map into economic behavior. So the two fields are completely capable of coexisting. So stereotype threat is the problem that you're being confronted with the fact that, for example, you as a woman in chess, you're told, oh, I'm bad at this. And then that puts pressure on you that not only do you have to compete in that moment, but you're also representing essentially all women at chess.
An extra layer of pressure.
Yeah. There's this really cool paper. It was published in Quantitative Economics in 2023. They actually show that if women, for example, get randomly allocated a male opponent in opens, that they play worse, like same, even if their opponent had the same rating, just because their opponent is a man, for example. And that, for example, would be consistent with stereotype threat, that there's this extra pressure that's somehow crowding out cognitive resources.
Yeah. Okay. It's sad and it's interesting. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are here doing this project, is because we want to point to it and educate people and say, like, this is a thing. It's not made up. It's not just, I was going to say in our heads. It is in our heads, of course, but
just because something's in your head does not mean that it doesn't have real consequences. And I think that that's a key takeaway, because however you think, like, that informs your actions. Your beliefs immediately map onto what do you think is accurate and what do you think you should do given the set of information that you have at that time.
Yes, our opinions, our thoughts matter. We take actions, of course, based on them. Yeah. Okay. Well, so let me ask you this. So the, Title Tuesday, obviously these are titled players.
Yes.
Most of them, most of us are not titled players.
That's true.
Do you think these results hold across the general population? Any reason to think they would not hold?
I think that I'd be very, very careful in extrapolating it because, like you say, most people are entitled. There is definitely a survival process, especially in chess, right, where we know that the dropout rates are so unequal between girls and boys. There is a good reason to believe that women who might have persevered up to the title, whether it be a women's title or an open title, that they might be systematically different from the average women I pick out in the population. So I'd be very careful in how far I extrapolate it. I think that some of the mechanisms, they do hold up. For example, that feedback informs choices. I'm not sure 100% how much I would map into, like, for example, my emotional stability results, whether those would generally hold in a less competitive populace.
Okay.
Now, I do have a couple of good news. First of all, chess players are, psychometrically speaking, apparently fairly normal. So they're not
That's the most surprising thing I've heard today. All right, no, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. So they're not some sort of computers and emotionless beings. Like, they're on most metrics completely normal. There was this really cool study done with players in the German Bundesliga that compared them against, like, population norm statistics. And it was a fairly large sample for psychologists. So I have some trust in the results.
For a psychologist, I love that.
And overall, I think that extrapolating them to the general populace might be a bit difficult. So I'm hesitant to say, oh, this is 100% going to work out.
No, that makes sense. And I think that's not the first time We've heard people say a woman, especially who does stay in the game for a long time, might be built a little different than just may have a little bit extra perseverance. Yeah, that's
Certainly.
interesting. Okay.
But to that extent, we can say the same thing about people, for example, who select into highly male dominated fields, right? So if you think about women in engineering programs, physics programs, once they enroll in college, like they already decide to enter these fields and to persist in them. So they start gathering that information, what they're going into. So by that argument, you can even go say, oh, female engineers are definitely not the norm, like something's special about them in that sense. So
Well,
you see selection
especially
everywhere.
right. Well, especially nowadays, I mean, we know what we're getting into. I mean, if I'm a woman, I'm gonna be an engineer. I'm not. I wouldn't be under any apprehension that there's going to be a lot of women there. I know going in that I'm going to be a
Yes.
minority, and same with chess. I would think, except maybe for kids. I mean, kids may not know, but yeah. So I think, yeah, maybe there is just maybe an attitude that I know this is going to be an extra problem that I'm going to have to deal with, and I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Okay, so repeated exposure to loss affects, at least in the Title Tuesday sample, men and women the
Yes.
same. Okay, that's good. But extrapolating that to boys and girls, young children, maybe not.
I think it's harder to say, like I said again, because I have this survival problem and I can't argue it away perfectly. I did
Mm,
look like how, like whether age mattered in the sample. I didn't
okay.
find anything. However, I also can't rule out the fact that part of the reason I didn't find anything was that, like, for example, for kids, there's so few young titled kids that are also whose parents allow them to play Title Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, especially if you're confronted with these stereotypes early on, there was I think this was like one of the first gender stereotype studies in psychology. It was Mossad. It also inspired the Check and Mate book by Ali Hazelwood, for example.
Okay.
So it was a psychology study, and essentially they made girls play boys or they lied about who the gender of their opponent was. It was, I believe, the same opponent or a similarly one. But they would confront girls with the stereotypes. Oh, girls are bad at chess and things like that. And that already
Mm-hmm.
changed their play intentions, for example, like whether they wanted to just prevent themselves from getting embarrassed or whether they wanted to win. So I
Mm.
think, especially like if you're in an environment that perpetuates these types of stereotypes or where subconsciously you might be confronted with that, I think there's good reason to believe that you might be more heavily affected by it, right? So if upset
I
losses sting more, I can't imagine that, especially like early experiences are so formative to how you view the whole thing.
yeah. No, absolutely. Um, yeah. And especially, I mean, because it is so pervasive. I mean, even now we see there's a lot of popular streamers, chess streamers who are women, and they go out and
Yeah.
they play random people, and I can't count the number of times when some random guy on the street will make some comment about how, they're just not good, or, chess is a man's game or whatever.
Mm,
And this is modern day. This is not, you know, Bobby Fischer
yeah.
talking in 50 years ago. But it's interesting because, we have these, it's kind of like been in the zeitgeist in the chess community for decades, and you have world champions, Fischer and Kasparov, saying things like women can't play.
To be fair,
And
Kasparov did walk his comments back later on.
he did, absolutely, and Fischer did too. I mean, once he
Yes.
started with the Polgars and everything. So not to make examples of them or anything, to make
No,
half examples maybe.
there's this lovely quote by Nigel Short also.
Right, exactly. And so the point is, like, that's, these people are very influential. Their voices are carried throughout the community, and that stuff, those opinions, they filter out. So let me ask you, I mean, in 2026, we have data like this that says, well, women actually respond better in the short term to failure, and are able to kind of lock in and after a loss. And so in this one aspect, at least, women are actually doing better.
Mhm.
How do we use this information to improve the chess community?
So if you're thinking about how to improve the chess community, I think it's a bit more difficult than that just because the problems are so systemic rather than, oh, it's you lost a match and you've got to go. Right? It's always they improve relative to their own ability, to their own skills, or how I would usually expect them to play after a win. So like there's like this degree there. And if we're thinking about the gender inequality advancement, I think that the most important takeaway from my paper, at least, is that they are capable. In fact, if we think about like training investment and things like that, so not just the short run where they do appear to do better, but over the longer run, men and women are taking away the same information. Like they get a signal, oh, you were good at chess, you really placed well in this tournament, and they're
Mm-hmm.
both equally encouraged to keep going and to keep training, at least measured by online activity. So as far as I could
Sure.
approximate to online training and blitz games. And I think that if this is something that trainers are concerned about, so again, like these are their own people, they're already very established, they know what they're doing, and I'm sure that they have some reasonable degree of self-confidence in their skills. But if we're going further down, I think that that's an important message also for coaches to take home, right? So it's not that they don't react to these things. It's not they don't care, but keep
Mm.
encouraging them and saying, hey, you're going to come back stronger from this and using that as a vehicle to encourage persistence. And I think that that's part of the equation, right? So, I mean, it's not, if you're thinking about teenagers, kids, or even like young adults, college aged kids getting into chess, right? You're typically not going to be a monolith like you against the world, right? You're going to be part of a larger community and
Right.
also embracing and sharing those losses. But again, like this is like going very far from like what my paper speaks to.
Well, no, no, and that's why I mean, this is one question I wanted to ask you. I mean, just as, as a woman, a professional, a chess player in the world. I mean, let me ask you this. If you had a magic wand, how about that? If you had a magic wand, you could do anything, uh, in chess. What changes would you make to improve chess for girls and women
I'd really
and
like the
gender minority
results.
players? I don't want to leave anybody out, but,
I'd
close
really
these
like the
gaps.
results of like two of my projects right now to like have a better informed opinion.
Okay. Ooh, are you allowed to tell us what those are?
Only very broadly because
Okay.
the work is so preliminary. Like one of them I've just completed the data construction. The other one we're still working on the descriptive statistics. One of them relates to contributing factors to the rating gap. So when does it emerge? How does dropout play into it? And essentially using a more comprehensive tournament history to
Okay.
reconstruct players' experiences. And the second one has to do with women's titles.
Ooh, okay. I
Yeah,
I can imagine. I speak for a lot of people who say I'm excited to hear about that one as well. That's a hot button issue.
I'm
And I
hoping that I'm going to have some quantitative evidence on the matter. Obviously, there's a question like how big are the samples? Can I get my statistical methods to work so that I could cleanly tell you A causes B, rather than A is somehow linked to B. But like I'm also
okay.
not really sure. But
Yeah,
yeah, those
too
are
early.
I'd really like those results right now. But
Okay, so a
I
magic wand. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
if I'd get to pick one thing, I think it would probably be first of all about funding opportunities, like just to broaden the outreach possibilities of chess, to bring more people in, make sure that access isn't a problem.
Mm,
And with that, hopefully also establish more funding opportunities for girls because women's chess, still, if you think about prize funds and things like that, women's chess is incredibly undersupported. And right now, at least we're seeing that there is a demand for women's chess, right? So there is women's tournaments, women's sections, and people are going there. So clearly there is some sort of supply and demand happening for these events. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taking place. And I
okay.
think that part of it would also be increasing the funding, increasing the reach and visibility. But again, I mean, that's a perfect magical wand. And hopefully, in 1 or 2 years after my postdoc, I'll have more info for you.
That's great, and it's actually very helpful. I mean, I think especially at the local level. Well, for example, one of my local clubs here. A couple of them actually. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and
Oh, okay.
a couple of our local clubs do regular tournaments and offer free registration to girls. They say any girl who wants to play,
Yeah.
you can come play for free. So is that an example of the sort of the thing that you the change that you would make if you had a magic wand in order to get more girls into the game at early ages? What other resource allocations would you make if in
I
addition to that?
think that generally club funding, so making sure that there is sufficient support, that you've got staff, that you've got material, that you've got volunteers who are willing to spend time with them, bringing in, for example, other women chess players, because we know that role model effects are important, right? So getting those contact opportunities would be one of them. In terms of free registration, I imagine that it might work. I'd like to see the evidence though. So I'm sorry. I'm like, this is like the academic coming through. Like, it seems plausible, but does it actually
Does
work?
it actually work? I wonder that too. I absolutely do. I think
If you know someone at US Chess, like I'm happy to figure it out for them.
okay. No, that's great. Because I think what we're trying to do with this project is everybody in chess knows that there's a huge gender gap,
Yes.
and every reasonable person in chess feels that it's a problem and wants to fix it. And I think from what I've seen and read, most people are just sort of running around saying, "Well, what do I do? What do I do? I'm willing to help, but what do I do?" And I think if we could come up with some actual recommendations, not, I mean, federation level stuff, sure, but even local stuff.
I mean, that's where it starts, right? Before you're even on the Federation's radar, like you're playing at your local clubs. And there's this really cool paper, if you'll give me like 2 minutes to highlight it.
Please do.
Okay, so this is by my amazing colleague Jose de Sousa and Muriel Nidado, and they wrote a paper on an affirmative
Yes.
action quota in chess.
In
So,
France.
yes, there is a French chess league, and what essentially happened is they introduced a new board. And this is a club level championship. So, clubs are playing each other, first board, second board, so on and so forth, down to the
Hmm.
newly created eighth board. Now, the eighth board did have a caveat. It had to be equipped with a homegrown, so you couldn't import talent like, for example, you can for the German Bundesliga. So she had to be
Okay.
French or registered under the French Chess Federation,
Okay.
and she had to be a woman. That was the rule. And if you didn't,
Mm.
if you were somehow unable to find a single woman, that would penalize your club in the rankings because you would essentially be forfeiting the game. So
Okay.
what they were able to find is, first of all, that the women did improve over time. So they were put on these boards and they even started climbing, but they were also able to show that, at least at the aggregate French level, that overall women's ratings started steadily improving, like, for example, compared with other European countries who didn't have similar rules. And they have some evidence that it even trickled down to the club level, so that you had these women who were playing, like one woman per club playing on
Wow.
this board, but they had evidence that they were bringing in or keeping other girls further down the line in their club. So
Okay.
that's why I say that visibility is such a huge topic, because we know that, especially if you're, for example, in a stereotyped environment or a minority, that you want that kind of visibility, right? You want that proof that someone has done it before you. And I think that's also part of why for example, the Polgar sisters, not just because they were the first, but because they are one of the very few, are still held as such a role model.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I imagine that having, strong players who are local is just as important because you go to the club and at least one woman is there. A
Yeah.
girl isn't going to be all alone. I mean, we hear stories. I think Anna Cranling told. I mean, she's not the only one. There's
Yes.
hundreds of them, but horrible stories about going to tournaments with her mom, and she and her mom would be the only women there, and of course, men said horrible things and all that. But yeah, this French is very interesting. Yeah, I hope we are able to talk more about that because that's an interesting, possible recommendation we could make to, at a federation level or at even for tournament organizers.
Find one
Yeah,
woman.
find a woman.
And
Yeah.
the way that they did it was rather clever. Of course, how well does it scale is another question. But because they tied the women's success to the club's success, they had created an incentive, whether they knowingly did so or not, for the clubs to also invest in their women, right? It wasn't just enough that you bring a body to fill the board who happens to be
She,
a woman,
you
but
want her to
you also
win.
wanted her to be skilled and to win her games.
Hmm.
And they were also like, they did a bunch of extra things on like how this affected, for example, the marginal man that she may have crowded out or things like that. But overall, I would say the story is quite hopeful that there are things that can be done and there are things that have changed. I think his PhD student is also doing something on like gender chess tournaments.
Okay. This is fantastic. Well, I should have said this at the top, to everyone who's listening or watching, I'm going to put all these resources in the notes. And Julia, I'll get with you after to get all these citations because this is really great stuff. Let me ask you this. I mean, we've been talking this whole time about all of this. Why is any of it economics? What, why should we even listen to you,
You sound like the average seminar audience.
Well, that's who we are, right?
Of course, of course. Essentially, why is this economics? Economics is fundamentally about how we allocate scarce resources. So in our specific case, this means opportunities. And the question is, how do
Mm,
we decide who gets opportunities, right? Who gets that visibility, who gets the top spot? And we have decided for a lot of things that competition is the way to go in some abstract form or another, right? In chess, it's very visible. But the question is, who even enters into competition and what is this competition selecting on? We'd ideally want our competitions to result in the best possible chess players emerging. So that's broadly the goal.
okay.
So we want qualified people to be entering, and we also want to be selecting on that. So if we have, for example, mechanisms that result in people dropping out prematurely, withdrawing, or somehow just deciding, oh, it's not worth it, right? We're going to have a misallocation of talent. And that's what we in economics call an inefficiency, and that's what we hate. So why do we care about this? Because we care about making sure that there is some sort of process that we deem to be fair, where people are competing on the level playing field, right? So you don't
Mm.
want people to be entering into things and it's going to go, the prize is going to my buddy's brother, right? That even if it's a competition, right? We wouldn't say that that outcome is particularly fair. And that's essentially why it's economics. It's the process of how do we allocate, who wins, and what governs this process, and how do people behave during this process.
Okay. It makes sense why chess would be for an economist such an interesting area of research because the way chess is currently allocating resources and has, forever is very gendered and could be, and is unfair, right?
There is at least an argument that the resources or the system has been structured in a way that primarily the old establishment, I'm going to use this term very loosely, but that primarily looks at boys and men. And women have kind of had their side thing, so to speak. And
Sure.
therefore it gets less attention. And the question is, are the things that we're seeing now, is it a product of skill or a product of lacking resource investment? And I think especially in chess, there's a strong argument that it's resources.
Mm, okay. That's great. You gave us a lot to think about, Julia. I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
I can highly recommend to anyone who wants a deeper insight on what it's like to read Jennifer Shahadi's books. I thought they were incredibly illuminative while I was doing some background research.
Yes. I've got chess queens here today.
Yes,
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. She's great at highlighting the issues and yeah, I agree. Great reads.
and if you're somehow involved at the club level, think about, okay, am I seeing patterns of dropout, right? So it starts at the bottom and then just goes up, right? If we don't have a lot of women at the bottom, how are they supposed to rise? Where are they supposed to come from? You expect a
Right.
tree to come from the ground, not spring up in the midair.
That's a great analogy. I love that. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. And yeah, and hopefully we'll have you back after you've got some more interesting stuff to share.
I'd really like that. So
Sounds
thanks
great.
so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Julia.